From the infamous Malice in the Palace that cemented Ron Artest as one of the NBA's most combative players, to Carmelo Anthony's punch that got him suspended for 15 games, here are the most insane fights to ever happen in the NBA. The Malice at the Palace, 2004. When the Indiana Pacers traveled to the Palace of Auburn Hills on November 19, 2004, nobody could have predicted that they were about to witness the most catastrophic brawl in NBA history. What started as a routine blowout victory for the Pacers would transform into a nightmare that would haunt the league for years to come. The chaos began with just 45.9 seconds remaining in what appeared to be a decisive Pacers victory. Ron Artest, who would later change his name to Meta Sandiford Artest, committed what seemed like a routine hard foul on Detroit Pistons center Ben Wallace. But in the heated atmosphere of a rivalry game, nothing about this foul would prove routine. Wallace's reaction was immediate and explosive. He shoved Artest with such force that it sent shockwaves through the arena, igniting a powder keg that had been building throughout the evening. As the initial confrontation between Artest and Wallace began to simmer down, Artest made the fateful decision to lie down on the scorer's table, seemingly trying to defuse the situation. It was a moment of calm before the storm that would forever change the trajectory of multiple careers in the NBA itself. Then, like a match thrown into gasoline, a Pistons fan hurled a drink at the prone Artest, and everything exploded into chaos. Artest charged into the stands like a man possessed, attacking the wrong fan in his blind rage. The sight of an NBA player physically assaulting spectators was unprecedented and horrifying, but Artest wasn't alone in his rampage. Stephen Jackson and Jermaine O'Neal followed their teammate into the hostile crowd, throwing punches at anyone within reach as the distinction between players and fans completely dissolved.
Now Artest has jumped over the scorer's table and is trying to get down to the bench. Artest is in the stands. Oh, this is awful. Fans are getting involved. Stephen Jackson's in the fans. Rasheed Wallace going into the stands.
The Palace of Auburn Hills transformed into a battlefield. Chairs flew through the air, security guards were overwhelmed, and the very fabric of professional basketball seemed to tear apart before millions of horrified viewers watching on television. The images were seared into the collective consciousness of sports fans, professional athletes brawling with paying customers in a scene that resembled a riot more than a basketball game. The NBA's response was swift and severe. Commissioner David Stern, recognizing the existential threat this incident posed to the league's reputation, handed down suspensions that totaled an unprecedented 146 games. Artest received the harshest punishment, 86 games total, including 73 regular season games and 13 playoff games. Jackson was suspended for 30 games, while O'Neal received 15 games, reduced from an initial 25. Even Wallace, despite being the victim of the initial foul, was suspended for 6 games. The financial cost was staggering. Players lost a combined $11 million in salaries, while both teams were fined $250,000 each. But the monetary penalties were just the beginning of the fallout. 5 players faced criminal assault charges, ultimately pleading no contest and receiving probation and community service. Several fans were also banned from the arena, with some facing criminal convictions for their role in the melee. Next, we have the fight that almost ended the life of a player. Kermit Washington versus Rudy Tomjanovich, 1977. December 9th, 1977 seemed like just another night of NBA basketball when the Los Angeles Lakers faced the Houston Rockets. But in a matter of seconds, what appeared to be a minor scuffle would escalate into one of the most horrifying and life-threatening incidents in sports history, forever changing the lives of everyone involved and serving as a stark reminder of how quickly athletic competition can turn deadly. The incident began innocuously enough, with Lakers forward Kermit Washington and Rockets center Kevin Cunnert getting into a typical NBA scuffle over a rebound. These kinds of minor confrontations happen dozens of times throughout any given NBA season, usually amounting to nothing more than some pushing, shoving, and stern words from the referees. Rudy Tomjanovich, the Rockets' talented forward and future Hall of Fame coach, saw the confrontation unfolding and made what he believed was the right decision. He rushed in as a peacemaker. Tomjanovich had built a reputation as one of the NBA's good guys, a player who avoided controversy and tried to calm situations rather than escalate them. His intentions were pure, his motivations noble, but in the heat of the moment, those good intentions would nearly cost him his life. Washington, caught up in the chaos and adrenaline of the fight, misinterpreted Tomjanovich's approach. Instead of seeing a peacemaker rushing to break up the altercation, Washington perceived another threat, another opponent coming to join the fray. In that split second of confusion and misdirected aggression, Washington turned and delivered what would become known as one of the most devastating punches in sports history. The punch was catastrophic beyond imagination, fracturing Tomjanovich's skull, jaw, and nose with such force that it it nearly killed him. Medical experts later revealed that the impact was so severe that Tomjanovic's face was literally detached from his skull. The sound of the punch connecting echoed through the forum like a gunshot, and the sight of Tomjanovic collapsing to the floor in a pool of blood traumatized everyone who witnessed it. The medical team that rushed to Tomjanovic's aid wasn't dealing with a typical sports injury. They were trying to save a man's life. The injuries were so severe that doctors initially feared Tomjanovic might not survive. He underwent multiple surgeries, spent weeks in the hospital, and faced a long, uncertain road to recovery that would keep him off the basketball court for an entire season. The NBA's response reflected the gravity of the situation. Washington was suspended for 60 days, which amounted to 26 games, and fined $10,000. He was subsequently traded to the Boston Celtics as the Lakers organization struggled to move past the incident. The league also implemented significant rule changes, adding a third referee to games and tightening penalties for fighting. Washington's career was forever marked by the stigma of that single punch. Despite his genuine remorse and repeated attempts to make amends, he became known more for that moment of violence than for his considerable basketball talents. The weight of what happened haunted him for years, affecting his performance, his relationships with teammates, and his overall standing in the basketball community. Tomjanovic eventually returned to basketball, playing for 3 more years before retiring earlier than he had planned. The physical and emotional toll of the incident had changed him forever, robbing him of some of his athletic ability and altering the trajectory of what had been a promising playing career. Up next, we have the time Carmelo Anthony hit a man and then ran into the locker room. Melo's sucker punch, 2006. Madison Square Garden has witnessed countless memorable basketball moments throughout its storied history, but December 16, 2006 provided a spectacle that no one wanted to remember. The trouble began in the final, a minute of what had been a thoroughly one-sided affair. The Nuggets had dominated the New York Knicks throughout the evening, building a commanding lead that left the outcome in no doubt. The spark that ignited the powder keg came when Knicks guard Marty Collins committed a flagrant foul on Nuggets guard J.R. Smith during a fast break attempt. The situation escalated immediately when Knicks guard Nate Robinson, all 5'9" inches of pure fury, shoved the much taller Smith into the courtside stands. Robinson's aggressive action sent Smith tumbling backward, and in that moment, the relatively minor altercation transformed into something far more serious. The sight of players being shoved into the crowd immediately brought back memories of the Malice at the Palace just 2 years earlier, sending chills through everyone present. But the most shocking moment was yet to come. As the benches began to clear and players rushed toward the confrontation, Carmelo Anthony, one of the NBA's biggest stars and the face of the Nuggets franchise, threw a devastating sucker punch at Collins. The punch connected cleanly, but rather than standing and facing the consequences of his actions, Anthony immediately retreated from the scene, essentially running away from the chaos he had helped create. The NBA reacted to the event as you would expect. 7 players were suspended for a total of 47 games, with Anthony receiving the harshest penalty of 15 games. Robinson and Smith were each suspended for 10 games, Collins for 6 games, and Jared Jeffries for 4 games. Several other players received shorter suspensions for their involvement in the melee. The financial impact was staggering, with each team fined $500,000 and players losing a combined $1.2 million in salaries. Anthony later expressed feeling that he had been unfairly targeted by the league's punishment, arguing that his actions were no worse than those of other participants who received lighter suspensions. Next on this list is a fight that started after Doc Rivers got mad that he got dunked on. The birth of the bench rule, 1993. The incident on May 11, 1993, began with what seemed like a routine play during the heat of a competitive game. Phoenix Suns point guard Kevin Johnson, known for his aggressive style and fearless drives to the basket, executed an emphatic dunk over Knicks veteran Doc Rivers. Rivers' response was immediate and aggressive. He shoved Johnson after the dunk. The shove was hard enough to get Johnson's attention and spark his competitive instincts, but what happened next transformed a minor confrontation into a major incident that would reverberate throughout the league. Danny Ainge, the Suns' crafty guard, known for his scrappy play and willingness to mix it up with anyone, saw the confrontation developing and decided to intervene. Ainge's involvement escalated the situation beyond a simple 2-player altercation, drawing more players into the fray and raising the stakes considerably.
Look out! Here comes Rivers after Johnson. We have a free-for-all. Johnson blindsided Rivers.
But the most shocking development was yet to come. Greg Anthony, the Knicks point guard who wasn't even in uniform and was wearing street clothes on the bench, somehow found himself in the middle of the action and threw a punch at Kevin Johnson.
Pat Riley in the midst of it. Greg Anthony, though, took a shot at Kevin Johnson while he was being held.
The sight of a player in civilian attire physically assaulting an active participant was unprecedented and absolutely stunning to everyone who witnessed it. Anthony's punch was the catalyst that transformed a minor scuffle into a full-scale brawl. The incident quickly escalated as more players became involved, including notorious enforcers Charles Oakley from the Knicks and Charles Barkley from the Suns. The involvement of these two physical players, both known for their willingness to protect their teammates at any cost, elevated the potential for serious violence. The NBA's disciplinary response was swift. Anthony received a 5-game suspension for his role as the primary instigator, though he was allowed to petition for a return. Both Johnson and Rivers were suspended for 2 games each, reflecting their roles in the initial confrontation. The financial penalties were substantial for the time, with fines totaling $160,500. The Knicks organization was fined $50,000, while the Suns received a $25,000 fine. Perhaps most significantly, 14 players were fined $500 each for leaving the bench during the altercation, a penalty that highlighted the widespread nature of the brawl and the need for systematic change. The most lasting impact of this incident was the creation of what became known as the leaving the bench rule. The NBA implemented a mandatory suspension policy for any player who leaves the bench area during an altercation. This rule change was revolutionary, as it removed discretion from referees and league officials, making the consequences automatic and severe for players who couldn't control their emotions during fights. Next, we have one of the funniest fights the NBA has ever seen: Gundy's heroic leg cling. The 1998 Eastern Conference playoffs featured one of the most intense and physical rivalries in NBA history, as the Miami Heat battled the New York Knicks in a series that embodied everything brutal and beautiful about 1990s basketball. The rivalry between the Heat and Knicks had been building throughout the season, with both teams establishing themselves as physical, defensive-minded squads that weren't afraid to intimidate opponents. The stakes were incredibly high, as both franchises recognized that this playoff series represented their best opportunity to advance deep into the postseason and potentially challenge for an NBA championship. The incident occurred during one of the most crucial moments of the series, as Mourning and Johnson found themselves battling for position under the basket during a rebound attempt. Both players were known for their physical style and unwillingness to back down from confrontation, making this collision inevitable given the intensity of the playoff atmosphere. The positioning battle quickly escalated beyond typical post play, with both men trading increasingly aggressive contact. What started as pushing and shoving rapidly evolved into a full-scale boxing match, with Mourning and Johnson throwing legitimate punches at each other. The sight of two of the league's premier big men engaging in actual fisticuffs was shocking enough, but the fight's intensity and duration made it clear that this wasn't going to end without serious intervention. Enter Jeff Van Gundy, the Knicks' diminutive head coach who stood barely 5'9" and weighed perhaps 150 pounds, soaking wet. In what became one of the most iconic and unexpectedly heroic moments in NBA history, Van Gundy literally threw himself into the fray, wrapping his arms around Mourning's leg and clinging desperately to prevent the much larger man from continuing the fight.
And look at Van Gundy down at the bottom of your screen. That's Van Gundy just holding on.
Van Gundy's intervention was both comical and courageous. Here was a man who had no business physically confronting professional athletes, yet he risked his own safety to protect his players and restore order to the game. His leg-clinging technique became the stuff of NBA folklore, spawning countless memes and establishing him as one of the most beloved figures in basketball history. What makes this story particularly remarkable is its aftermath. Despite the intensity of their on-court battle, Mourning and Johnson, who had been teammates during their time with the Charlotte Hornets, eventually reconciled and developed a lasting friendship. In 2023, the two former adversaries appeared together in an Instagram reel, laughing about the incident and demonstrating how time can heal even the most heated rivalries. This list wouldn't be complete if we didn't add a Shaq versus Barkley fight to it, so that's what's up next. Shaq versus Barkley's Friendly Fire, 1999. On February 4th, 1999, basketball fans witnessed something extraordinary, a fight between future Hall of Famers that somehow managed to strengthen rather than damage their relationship. The confrontation between Shaquille O'Neal and Charles Barkley represented everything intense and entertaining about 1990s basketball, while ultimately demonstrating the power of genuine friendship to overcome momentary conflicts. The incident began with what seemed like routine post-play, as Shaq successfully blocked one of Barkley's signature shot attempts. But then O'Neal's follow-up action, a hard push on Barkley after the blocked shot, transformed a routine defensive play into something much more personal. Barkley, never one to back down from any confrontation regardless of his opponent's size or reputation, wasn't about to let O'Neal's aggressive follow-up go unanswered. He picked up the basketball and hurled it directly at O'Neal's head.
I wouldn't want efficient necessarily to take that shot that fast.
Oh, and there's a swing by O'Neal.
Shaq took a wild swing at Barkley, though fortunately the punch missed its target. The near miss was probably fortunate for everyone involved, as a clean connection from someone of Shaq's size and strength could have caused serious injury. Instead of landing a devastating blow, both giants ended up wrestling each other to the ground in a tangle of arms and legs, creating a spectacle that was more amusing than dangerous. The sight of two of the NBA's biggest stars rolling around on the court like schoolyard combatants was quite the sight. These weren't just any players, they were superstars, future Hall of Famers, and icons of the sport. Yet here they were, engaged in the kind of undignified scuffle that typically involved role players and bench warmers rather than franchise cornerstones. Teammates from both sides quickly intervened to separate the combatants before the situation could escalate further. The intervention was crucial, as both O'Neal and Barkley possessed the size and strength to cause serious damage if the fight had continued. The NBA's disciplinary response was relatively measured, with both players ejected from the game and subsequently suspended for 1 game each. The financial penalties were also modest by NBA standards. O'Neal was fined $10,000, while Barkley received a $5,000 fine. The relatively light punishments reflected the league's understanding that this was more of a momentary loss of control than a serious assault. What happened next transformed this incident from a typical NBA altercation into something genuinely heartwarming. Both players' mothers, who had developed a close friendship over the years, intervened to facilitate a post-game dinner between their sons. The dinner meeting was successful in quashing any potential feud before it could develop. Rather than allowing resentment to fester, both players were able to laugh about their momentary loss of control and reaffirm their mutual respect and friendship. The quick resolution prevented what could have been an ongoing rivalry between two of the league's biggest stars. The friendship between O'Neal and Barkley continued to flourish long after their playing careers ended. When both became colleagues on TNT's Inside the NBA, they frequently referenced their 1999 altercation as a source of entertainment for viewers. Their ability to joke about their past conflict while maintaining genuine affection for each other made them one of the most beloved broadcasting duos in sports television history. Next, we have a fight between two of basketball's biggest legends, Bird and Irving. Bird versus Dr. J's historic clash, 1984. The 1984 NBA season was already legendary before Larry Bird and Julius Erving ever threw a punch at each other, but their confrontation during a heated Celtic 76 ERs matchup added another layer to what was already one of the most compelling rivalries in basketball history. The Boston Celtics and Philadelphia 76 ERs had developed one of the most intense rivalries in professional sports throughout the early 1980s. These weren't just divisional opponents competing for playoff positioning. They were two championship-caliber teams led by transcendent superstars who represented different approaches to basketball excellence. Every meeting between these franchises carried the weight of history and the promise of memorable competition. On this particular night, Larry Bird was putting on an absolute clinic, dominating the 76 ERs with 42 points and demonstrating the full range of his offensive arsenal. Bird's performance was the kind of masterpiece that separated good players from great ones, as he seemed to score at will against one of the league's premier defensive teams. His shooting, passing, and court awareness were all operating at peak efficiency, creating the kind of individual performance that fans would remember for decades. Meanwhile, Julius Erving, the legendary Dr. J, who had spent his career redefining what was possible on a basketball court, was having an uncharacteristically quiet night with just 6 points. Bird, never one to miss an opportunity for psychological warfare, began engaging in his trademark trash talking, taunting Erving about his poor performance. His trash talking wasn't random or crude. It was strategic, calculated, and devastatingly effective. The breaking point came when Bird was called for an offensive foul, and his continued taunting finally pushed Erving beyond his breaking point. Dr. J, who had built a reputation as one of the most professional and composed players in the league, suddenly found himself unable to contain his frustration any longer. Erving shoved Bird, initiating the physical confrontation that everyone could see had been building throughout the evening.
And Moses Malone takes Bird down. He's got him in a headlock.
As the altercation escalated, Bird was held back by his teammates, which allowed Erving to throw several punches without fear of immediate retaliation. The incident quickly escalated as both benches cleared, threatening to turn the altercation into a full-scale brawl. The involvement of role players and reserves from both teams demonstrated how the rivalry between these franchises extended far beyond just the star players, creating an atmosphere where even the smallest conflicts could explode into major incidents. Surprisingly, the NBA chose not to issue any suspensions for the incident, reflecting reflecting either the league's recognition of the unique circumstances surrounding the fight or perhaps a different approach to discipline during that era. However, the financial penalties were substantial for the time, with fines totaling $30,500. Bird and Irving each received fines of $7,500, which represented the second highest individual fines in NBA history at that point. The clothesline heard round the world, 1984. The 1984 NBA Finals between the Boston Celtics and Los Angeles Lakers represented the pinnacle of professional basketball, featuring two legendary franchises, multiple Hall of Fame players, and a level of competition that defined an entire era. However, Game 4 of that series is remembered not just for its dramatic finish, but for one of the most controversial and strategically calculated acts of violence in NBA history, Kevin McHale's devastating clothesline of Kurt Rambis. The Lakers had entered Game 4 with momentum firmly on their side, having established a rhythm and confidence that threatened to put the series out of Boston's reach. But then Rambis, the Lakers' hard-working forward known more for his effort than his athleticism, found himself on a routine fast break layup attempt. It was the kind of play that happens dozens of times during any NBA game, a player breaking free for what should have been an uncontested scoring opportunity. Under normal circumstances, Rambis would have completed the layup, the Lakers would have extended their lead, and the momentum would have continued in Los Angeles' favor. Instead, Kevin McHale made a split-second decision that would define his reputation and alter the trajectory of the entire series. Rather than allowing Rambis to score easily, McHale delivered a vicious clothesline that sent the Lakers forward crashing to the floor. The contact was immediate, devastating, and completely intentional. McHale had made a calculated decision to sacrifice sportsmanship for strategic advantage. The clothesline sparked a bench-clearing confrontation as players from both teams rushed onto the court. The Lakers players were understandably outraged by what they perceived as a cheap shot against their teammate, while the Celtics seemed energized by McHale's willingness to escalate the physical intensity of the game. However, despite the heated emotions and aggressive posturing from both sides, no actual punches were thrown during the melee. The referee's response to the incident was surprisingly lenient by today's standards. Only a common foul was called on McHale, with no technical fouls, flagrant fouls, or ejections issued. No suspensions or fines were issued following the incident, which by contemporary standards seems almost impossible to believe. The NBA's decision not to punish McHale financially or through suspension demonstrated the league's acceptance of what was viewed as hard but legal basketball play, even though the intent to injure was obvious to everyone watching. Kurt Rambis, the victim of the clothesline, demonstrated remarkable sportsmanship and perspective in his post-career reflections on the incident. Rather than harboring resentment, Rambis eventually joked about the play and the era's physicality, understanding that McHale's actions were strategic rather than personal. McHale himself later expressed a somewhat different perspective, quipping that he wished it had been Magic Johnson instead of Rambis. His comment revealed the calculated nature of his actions. This wasn't an emotional outburst, but a strategic decision designed to gain competitive advantage through intimidation. We talk about the time Michael Jordan scratched an opponent in a playoff game. Jordan versus Miller's playoff intensity, 1993. When Michael Jordan and Reggie Miller clashed during the 1993 Eastern Conference playoffs, basketball fans witnessed a confrontation between two of the most competitive and skilled players in NBA history. The Chicago Bulls and Indiana Pacers had developed an intense rivalry throughout the early 1990s, with Miller establishing himself as one of the few players willing to consistently challenge Jordan's dominance. While most NBA players were content to simply compete against his airness, Miller actively sought confrontations, viewing Jordan as the ultimate test of his own competitive spirit and basketball skills. The incident began with what appeared to be a routine fast break opportunity for the Bulls. Jordan had ignited one of Chicago's trademark transition attacks, the kind of play that had become synonymous with the Bulls' championship-level basketball. However, Miller's aggressive defensive play transformed the routine fast break into something much more personal. Miller executed a putback attempt and followed it with a hard shove on Jordan, sending the Bulls' superstar out of bounds. The shove was clearly intentional and aggressive. For most players, challenging Jordan in such a direct manner would have been unthinkable, but Miller thrived on exactly these kinds of confrontations.
Now Michael Jordan and Reggie Miller having a go at it. And I mean, we got fist throwing. Here come the benches. Bo Hill is out there. Bill Jackson's going out there. There'll be fines handed out all over the place.
Jordan's response was visceral. He scratched Miller's face and threw a punch at the Pacers guard. As if that wasn't enough, Miller was immediately ejected from the game and subsequently fined $6,000 for his role in initiating the confrontation. Jordan, despite being deemed the aggressor by league officials, was allowed to remain in the game. He was suspended for one game and fined $10,000, but his ability to continue continue playing in that game demonstrated the preferential treatment often accorded to superstars. Jordan took full advantage of the opportunity, scoring 40 points and leading the Bulls to victory in a performance that epitomized his competitive greatness. The incident intensified the already fierce rivalry between Jordan and Miller, with Miller later expressing that he relished the opportunity to challenge Jordan as the ultimate test of his competitive spirit. For Miller, going head-to-head with the game's greatest player represented the pinnacle of professional competition, regardless of the potential consequences or penalties involved. Despite the heated nature of their on-court battles, no personal animosity lingered between Jordan and Miller beyond their professional competition. Miller's post-career interviews revealed his perspective on challenging Jordan, noting that competing against his airness represented the ultimate validation of his own basketball skills. Finally, we have a fight that was so intense that police officers had to get involved. Championship stakes violence, Lucas versus Dawkins in the finals, 1977. The 1977 NBA Finals between the Portland Trail Blazers and Philadelphia 76ers represented the culmination of a magical season for the Pacific Northwest, but Game 2 of that series is remembered as much for its shocking violence as for its basketball. The Philadelphia 76ers entered the 1977 Finals as heavy favorites, featuring a roster loaded with talent and experience. Darryl Dawkins, the young center known for his incredible athleticism and intimidating physical presence, was expected to dominate the Blazers' front court and lead Philadelphia to what seemed like an inevitable championship. The 76ers had the talent, the depth, and the playoff experience that typically translated to championship success. The incident began with what appeared to be routine post play, as Dawkins became entangled with Portland forward Bob Gross during a rebounding attempt. These kinds of minor confrontations happened constantly during NBA games, usually amounting to nothing more than brief pushing and shoving before players separated and returned to the action. However, the intensity of the finals atmosphere and the high stakes involved transformed this minor altercation into something much more significant. Dawkins' decision to attempt what witnesses described as a cheap shot against Gross was the catalyst that ignited the powder keg. Maurice Lucas, Portland's enforcer and one of the toughest players in the league, witnessed Dawkins' cheap shot and made an immediate decision that would define his reputation and alter the series' trajectory. Lucas delivered a devastating sucker punch to Dawkins, catching the 76ers center completely off guard and sending a shockwave through the Philadelphia spectrum. Dawkins, despite his reputation as one of the league's most physically intimidating players, was completely unprepared for Lucas's surprise attack. The punch triggered a massive bench-clearing brawl that quickly spiraled out of control. Players from both teams rushed onto the court, creating a chaotic scene that threatened to turn violent beyond any reasonable bounds. The situation became so dangerous that fans and police officers were forced to intervene to restore order, transforming a basketball game into something resembling a riot. Both Lucas and Dawkins were immediately ejected from the game and subsequently fined $2,500 each. Surprisingly, neither player received a suspension. No lasting enmity developed between Lucas and Dawkins following the incident. Both players understood that their confrontation was born of the intense competition and high stakes of the NBA Finals rather than personal animosity. They continued to play against each other without further incidents, demonstrating the professional maturity that characterized many players from that era. The Lucas-Dawkins fight remains one of the most consequential altercations in NBA Finals history, proving that a single moment of violence can alter the trajectory of an entire championship series and define the legacies of everyone involved. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to watch another fascinating video like this, click on one of the boxes on your screen right now.